Hello and welcome. This is our first interview of our South African series of our Quantum Way Chronicles. And I'm really, really thrilled to be at Simon Whitesman house. Thank you for inviting us at your home in your country, South Africa. And I know it's dear to our heart because it's Lisa's country of birth, and she was raised here, and it's also your country, your heart country. So thank you.
Thanks, Florence. It's lovely to have you and the whole team here in our home and in this very beautiful place, especially in the valley here that we live in the tip of South Africa. So welcome to you.
It's very special for us to be here in this country because people have like an idea of what South Africa is, where it is, of course, where it is, but also the story of apartheid and Nelson Mandela. That's all that they know about South Africa. But I really want to emphasize maybe your work here, what you do. You have different hats or caps, or I don't know how you say it. And you do some research, you do some trainings, you have a practice, a psychotherapy practice. So with all those things you do here, what is the most important for you to share with us as
Yeah, it's always an interesting thing to be asked what I do, and I think most of us when we encounter it's like, what do you do? So I think the ground for me is like the whatever I do feels like an expression of increasingly of who I am and my core interests, which is to live a life of increasing presence in an embodied way, and to be in service in the world while also taking care of myself, and to do that in a way that is aligned with the wisdom teachings, various wisdom teachings, and to do that with an open heart. I think that for me, so I guess you could say that's a healing path, the essence of the healing path. And I've tried to find different ways to express that through my work. And where I started 35 years ago when I graduated from medical school and where I am now feels like worlds apart. But maybe aren't really worlds apart, maybe just have grown on each, they've grown and developed and evolved. So the work I do, which is an expression of these aspects of myself, my own healing path, started in medicine, in general medicine. And then from that evolved into an understanding that the mind was hugely relevant and significant in the genesis of illness, the generation of illness, and the recovery from illness. And that led to a desire to deepen my understanding of working with the mind. So I trained as a psychotherapist, and my work now, predominantly my one-on-one work, is psychodynamic, depth, long-term psychotherapy. And I've, various influences in that process. Like many therapists, the psychoanalytic model has been important. But in the more recent cycle of my growth as a therapist has been the influence of self-psychology, which is Kohut was the core theorist of that.
what do you call self?
Self-psychology. So self-psychology works on a very different core principle to psychoanalytic, Freudian psychotherapy, in that rather than looking at issues with drive theory, which is what Freud introduced, Kohut said the core psychological issue that we face as human beings is a disruption in our emotional experience and the way that we defend against that. So the unsafety that comes in our early attachments. And the way we adapt to that is really the epicenter of a self-psychological approach. So we're not looking for repressed aggression, even though it might be a part of the picture. It's really an emotional absence. And the way that we protect ourselves from that emotional absence when we're very small. And the psychotherapeutic relationship is to create just that, a relationship when it's increasingly possible through safety and connection and attunement to begin to relocate the split off parts of our emotional reality. That probably ultimately converged with psychoanalysis too, but it's very much an emphasis on intersubjectivity, which is my subjectivity and your subjectivity meet in the relational field. So it's not a standoffish kind of approach to therapy. The experience of the therapist, the subjectivity of the therapist is as important as the subjectivity of the patient or the client. So that has been a wonderful expansion and exploration of my individual work, because I feel I can bring more of myself into the room and into the relationship and not feel like I'm somehow doing something wrong. So that's been a wonderful learning, and I've been guided by some very wise people in that approach. So that's my one-on-one work, and I'll come back to what that might look like in terms of the client base and the issues that we work with. Then in parallel to that, I've been drawn to the contemplative practices over the last 3 decades, and initially through transcendental meditation and then mindfulness, and then discovered that mindfulness was being used as a therapeutic and healing orientation, mainly through John Kabat-Zinn's work at the University of Massachusetts. So trained in that and offered MBSR for 2+ decades with a few colleagues here in Cape Town. And that evolved from teaching mindfulness-based stress reduction and other adaptations of mindfulness-based stress reduction to actually training people to teach MBSR or mindfulness-based interventions, which I've been doing for the last, decade and a half or so through Stellenbosch University, which is one of the big universities in South Africa, through the Faculty of Medicine and Health Science. And that itself has evolved based on my doctoral research, looking at some of the graduates of our training, and particularly the graduates who've taken the work of teaching mindfulness out into communities where there's a tremendous amount of trauma. So I use the phrase a trauma-dense environment, which I'm sure everybody can relate to, whether it's not necessarily in their community, although it might be, where there's a high incidence of trauma. It's very dense. The symptoms of it, both individual and collective, are very pervasive.
When you say trauma dense environment, it's dense, D-E-N-S-E, and not D-A-N-C-E.
Yeah. Although, if you could dance with a dense, that actually would be a beautiful orientation from a healing perspective. And in fact, in Africa, dancing is essential to healing. We don't sit still. We want to move. And so maybe we can come back to the importance of movement. From a talk therapist like myself, I've also learned through my own experience that dancing and movement is a profound and accessible way to integrate heart and body and mind and relationship. So, and in Africa, it's much more of a comfortable thing to dance and drum and move and sing and ululate than to sit and talk. Either way, the trauma-dense environments was a wonderful opportunity to see, well, what actually works when people are teaching and what doesn't work. What are the necessary ingredients?
This is the core of your research.
Yeah,
right?
that was the core of it.
10-year long
Yeah,
research?
It was a 10-year research project which culminated in extraordinary interviews with a number of people saying, well, what did you teach? How did you teach? What was that like? How did the people that you were teaching respond? And out of that, distill some of these essential ingredients, which I found fascinating because it wasn't necessarily anything dramatically new, nothing new under the sun. But it was drawing from my individual psychotherapeutic experience, especially self-psychology. And it was drawing on neurobiology, and it was drawing on a lot of the other theorists and theories that exist out there for navigating trauma. But it was all cohered under the umbrella of teaching mindfulness. And so those are the kind of different threads, if you will. Individual psychotherapy, training other people to share mindfulness in traumatized environments and communities, and then researching what works and what doesn't work, and in a way with a implicit question that we don't actually know. We have some ideas. And so it's really good to listen to people on the ground who are courageous enough to go and do that work and listen to what they are saying. And so that's the basis of the work I'm doing currently and continue to do. Yeah.
So let's go backward and begin with the research, because it's the last thing you mentioned. What are the main results, or what did you learn, even if it's something you knew, but it's, you know, sometimes when we know something, it's so nice to have something that is validating what we know, and because it's the way then to transmit it, to pass it to other people. So what are the main things you want to share, or you could share about your research?
So I developed a model, if you will, based on this. It's like, let's say the core principles or approaches or pillars. And the first, I would say that the first two are the most important, like the foundational pillars, and that they are a holding environment and relationality. Now, these are just words. And those two elements are intimately connected. You can't create a holding environment unless you are relational. And being relational in an authentic and attuned way is inherently holding. And what that research confirmed is, in a way, that mapped beautifully onto the requirements for good psychotherapy. And irrespective of what mode or school or lineage of psychotherapy you practice, if the environment and the patient is not being held, and it isn't a relational field, I think that really misses something fundamentally important about the human experience. Because the most pervasive form of trauma, linking the concept and the issue of trauma, is not big T trauma, but attachment or developmental trauma. So whether you're teaching or sharing mindfulness or doing any other intervention that might help with human distress and suffering, this is a fundamental principle, which is more than a principle, it's a practice, it's a way of implementing that into practice, which is to create an environment in which people feel held, because our early experience as children is the degree to which we were held. And in this regard, it's being held emotionally. Most people get held enough physically, they get their physical needs met. But because of our parents' issues and our ancestral line issues with unprocessed emotions, and especially unsafety or the lack of safety to feel certain emotional experiences, those tend to get pushed away. And as Gabor Mate says, we have this unconscious internal dilemma between attachment and connection and authenticity. Right? Authenticity means the safety to feel whatever you feel without judgment or fear of punishment, or worse, fear of the relationship fracturing. So that's what you try and create in a psychotherapeutic relationship all the time. And when you are teaching mindfulness or sharing mindfulness, one should do the same. It was just fairly obvious in those traumatized environments, creating a holding environment. And now, how do you create a holding environment? Well, the most important element is mindfulness, presence, human presence. It's simply not possible to hold another being or to hold a group of human beings if we're not present. And by that presence, it includes presence to my own experience. And that again brings in the subject, the intersubjectivity, the two subjectivities, whether it's an individual or group or the therapist or the teacher, that the awareness, the presence, and it's an embodied presence, is the foundation. It can be very subtle, almost invisible. What is palpable is its absence. In other words, if there isn't an embodied presence, one can feel a leaking or a fracturing of this holding capacity. So this is how these two worlds, I think, intersect and confirm each other. And then the relationality it's almost self-evident. If one comes with an attitude when you're sharing mindfulness, for example, that I know and you don't know, and I'll give it to you, and I have it and you don't have it, and there's something wrong with you, but I'm okay. That's dead in the water. So it requires a willingness on the part of the teacher or the person sharing mindfulness to be a dedicated soul to their own practice, to their own waking up, to their own embodied presence, and being able to work with their own inner life. And that in that way we become increasingly available and attuned, to use Thomas Hübel's, it's not his concept, but he's really foregrounded that, to become increasingly attuned to the inner state of the other or others, if it's a group. So there's this, I use the idea of a figure of eight, that infinity signal, symbol? Mm-hmm. So the infinity symbol can be vertical as we are intrapersonally aware. We're aware of our inner state, our sensations, our feelings and emotions, our thoughts, our sense perceptions. And we can be aware of them in a non-judgmental, open way as much as we can. And then if we take that vertical infinity symbol and we make it horizontal, and then it starts to flow between me and you. And then there's this beautiful flow. It's the same qualities and energies, if you will, but the directionality is slightly different. And so we want people to begin to sense that horizontal becoming vertical inside themselves. And that's how we build our relational capacity, builds that capacity within the people we teach mindfulness to. So that's what emerged in the research. There are other things that we added that emerged as well, which are very important, which are not typically in the mindfulness-based field. The most significant of which is regulating the nervous system. So one of the big areas of conversation and research in the mindfulness field is trauma-sensitive mindfulness. And I've always found this very, very interesting, because we just went out and taught mindfulness, certainly when I started teaching. And there's been a growing sensitivity, especially after the publication of David Treleaven's book, the book named Trauma-Sensitive Mindfulness. It really got people's attention.
He's one of the authors I really like to interview. He's a wonderful man.
He's an incredible human being, and was actually here at our conference and gave a keynote. So it's a very important.
And we've been translating his online course, and it's profound.
It's profound and important, and also self-evident. So when we practice mindfulness, and this is one of the challenges that I got conceptually, but was corroborated by the research and really reinforced our understanding of how we train people to share mindfulness in our communities, in many of our communities, albeit there are many other systemic challenges attached to that. And it's linked with two core theoretical concepts. One is that Bessel van der Kolk's, extraordinary insight is the body keeps the score. And that, you've done a lot of interviewing with Bessel, and so there's a lot that's been spoken about that. It's such a foundational concept of trauma. And I would say human suffering. So trauma as the modern word for the expression of human suffering. It's now trauma. It might be called something else at some other point. But trauma is an embodied experience in that the way that our emotional and relational experience goes offline, and how we defend against that somehow is retained not only in our neurobiology, but in our entire physiology and in our subjective experience. So if the trauma is the body keeps the score, and we put that next to the teachings on mindfulness, the original teachings are called the 4 teachings on the 4 foundations of mindfulness, Satipatthana Sutra. And the first of the 4 foundations is mindfulness of the body. So whenever you teach mindfulness or practice mindfulness, it always starts with mindfulness of the body, in the commonest ways with the breath, for example. But it's not the only access point into the bodily experience. So if you put the body keeps the score with trauma, and the first foundation of mindfulness is mindfulness of the body, or awareness of the body, or bodily awareness, and you put those together, you run a certain degree of risk.
Yeah, it can be risky. That was really, it is risky.
It's risky, exactly. So to know that, to be sensitive to that, to recognize that convergence is to be trauma sensitive. And it requires a certain amount of courage and skill to be able to work with that. But that's why we added the regulation of the nervous system as an additional piece, and that emerged out of the research. We don't just drop people into mindfulness practice. We introduce basic ways of regulating the nervous system, of which there are many. And we're still learning which ones work best, because in one community, like doing breath works might be better than in another community where movement might be better, or singing and dancing might be better. So one requires a different amount of flexibility, but the core principle remains the same. And then the other important element is we call embodiment, and that's the embodiment of the person who's sharing. It's, as I mentioned at the beginning of this monologue, part of the conversation.
It's your space.
It's my space.
I'm holding the space for you.
Exactly.
And you can express whatever you want.
Wonderful. This is not an up and out approach. It's somewhere out there and something abstract and reifying and conceptualizing. Concepts are useful only as they give you a map of the territory. But to be down and in, come in and down into our experience as a teacher, facilitator, somebody who shares mindfulness with others, is very, very important.
And what are the biggest challenges you've encountered, or what does maybe the South African environment, which is full of trauma, collective, individual trauma, collective trauma, historical trauma, multi-generational trauma. I think the context is different here. And how did it influence maybe the research you've done and the work you're doing into bringing mindfulness into different communities with different maybe relation to trauma, but also attachment, different attachment style or way of being attached?
Yeah, it's so layered, that question, because I can't really speak on behalf of, I have a particular experience growing up in this country as a white-bodied male, which has affected my perception and my experience. So I do, of course, have understanding by virtue of listening to others and sitting with others and just being open-minded. What I do know is that South Africa has a particular expression of trauma, which is in a certain way unique. But it's deeper than that. It's just it's trauma, and it's the human condition where people are just suffering tremendously, individually or collectively. And so I like to say it is unique, but it's also isn't. It's not special.
It's also universal.
It's not like I always used to think, well, South Africa's special. We've got all these things going on, and it's unique in the story, in the narrative, in its expression. But it's not fundamentally different from anywhere else. I think that's an important thing to say. I think we might have spoken about this briefly last time we spoke a few years back, but one of the kind of conceptual placeholders that I use, or I like to use, is to look at the word apartheid, because it's such a loaded word, it's so pervasive, and unfortunately it's still in place. Systemically in particular, you would have seen driving from Cape Town International Airport to your guest house, you would have passed and you were like, my goodness, 30 plus years after the fall of apartheid, this is how so many people live. And it's, that's all over the country. So what is going on here in the collective line of trauma. So apartheid is apartness. It was built into the legislation, and people were conditioned, not just through the legislation, but culturally and emotionally and mentally and socially, into this separation, apartness. So apartheid is apartness, and separation. That is almost the core understanding of what trauma is. When we become separated from somebody we're dependent on, we become separated from ourselves, we become separated from our land of belonging through people who become refugees, we become separated from our families. There's so many ways that separation can happen. And if we link again, if I just cross-link this with the original teachings of the Buddha, where his word for use of the word, we do use the word suffering in English, his original word was dukkha. And there are various understandings of that original Pali word, D-U-K-K-H-A. Not D-U-K-K-A, which is an Egyptian spice, which is very nice. But dukkha, and so there are various understandings of that, but one of the most sublime interpretations of that is the original root of the Pali word is actually Sanskrit. And the Sanskrit is two words, du, D-U, and ka, K-H-A, which means apart from the whole, or apart from wholeness. So if we're talking about trauma and the inherent nature of that experience of trauma being suffering, we're talking about apartness, apart from the whole, apart from our inherent wholeness, our Buddha nature, our natural state, apart from the wholeness of being of an intact community or an intact family or an intact relationship, just on a one-on-one level, where there's a severing of attachment because of poor attunement or so forth. So there's that apartness. The root understanding and the deepest wisdom teachings of Sanskrit, or that beautiful language, is this apart from the whole, or apart from wholeness. So one can see how even the word apartheid is infused with suffering. And it shows itself individually, it shows itself collectively, and it shows itself in the ancestral line. And unfortunately, unless we bring a different quality to bear on that, not just simply trying to change the structures, the reiteration of ancestral trauma just gets repeated. That was one of the great contributions of Freud, is the repetition compulsion. This just repeating the same pattern in hope it will just get better, but of course it just reinforces itself. So we have a unique view on suffering as a country that is embodied in the fabric of our communities, in our individual relationships, in our social structures, in our financial structures, in our governmental structures, and it's very painful to see. You just have to drive around and notice at every traffic light that there's somebody begging for money. And what is more painful than that is to observe oneself or others responding to that. People turning away, ignoring, moving their cars forward. I mean, that's just a small little inkling of what happens. We can't bear to look. So the capacity to show up is the first step, the most important step. And to do that in a way that is holding and containing and relational, that is, without that we can't navigate, we can't begin to redress the trauma, whatever its manifestation.
Yeah, and what we were talking about apartheid and separateness, it really reminds me, like, the country is separated, and it's still, as you said, when you walk in the street, you can really see that there are groups of people, different groups of people. And even I spoke in the plane with someone who lived in Cape Town, and he's more on the Afrikaners side, and he was saying, I don't know what the British do. I don't know their habits, or like separation is still there, but it reminds me also about how separate we are from our different parts. And IFS is really like a good way of seeing how when something is happening outside, you live it inside, and how do you have to heal inside to heal the outside. If you're not whole inside, how can you pretend to bring a country to a whole? I don't know if it makes sense but I really, yeah, it really didn't echo like that. Like we are holding that and bringing also a Resma Menakem, who's we've just translated his book, is really saying that observe. And when you talk about, look at what's happening inside. When you see someone asking for money, what do you do? What is it, and what do you bring, and how do you carry those systemic racial trauma or apartheid trauma, if I can say it like that, and that's part of what we have, the work we have to do.
He is a wise man, and in fact, because racialized trauma in this country is, I don't think, of course, racialized trauma exists everywhere, but if anybody was going to associate South Africa with suffering, they would associate with racialized trauma. And one of the most profoundly useful things from Resma's teachings is he doesn't talk about black people and white people. He talks about black-bodied people and white-bodied people. So I only use that language. And first of all, it frees me up to say I'm white-bodied. Like, it doesn't feel so loaded. It's like I'm white and you're black, or I'm white. And so what he's pointing to is that you are born into an individual and collective experience if you're born into a black body, which is not only cultural and emotional, but also neurophysiological. For example, the set point for your stress response might be quite different from being born into a white body in South Africa. And the conditions then get reinforced. And so that is that's why it's so important to regulate the nervous system, because those responses, let's call them reactions, are built very deeply into the neuromatrix right from the get-go. And so working with one's white-bodiedness as a white-bodied man is a journey of recognizing implicit bias. And to not judge that, but just to recognize, oh, there is implicit bias. Here it is. This is how it shows up as thoughts and narratives and emotions. And as part of the mindfulness practice, there's this benevolent quality of allowing. Can I just recognize and allow and let this be? Then what happens, that part, if you want to use IFS, that part just becomes a part. And there's a subtle, implicit falling back into something more whole. And that something more whole is not really a thing. It's the quality of the holding, which is presence itself. And so all of these different elements come together, whether we're talking individual or collective, in the quality of presencing. I call it presencing because it's present participle, which allows all of these different contributing factors and symptom complexes and causes to be recognized for what they are. That there's such a paradox in healing, as the deepest healing is not from getting rid of anything, but from acknowledging and allowing and in a sense letting it be. And that's really, really difficult to do, firstly, if it's very painful. Secondly, if there's a lot of anger and grief and fear and distrust. So we've got our work cut out for us to completely change the paradigm of possibilities here. From, let's call, it's maybe oversimplistic to say a fixing model, but there's nothing to actually fix at the deepest level. It's to acknowledge, allow, and to recognize, and to contain and hold and honor the pain. It gets transmuted in how it's held. And the higher the frequency with which it's held, the greater the transmutation. And it's important, I would add here, this is not to say don't take action. Absolutely not. There's an infinite number of things that need to get done. And what we are needing more is wise action. And if we are failing to understand that presence and our inherent capacity to be where we are isn't part of the calculus, then whatever action we take is more often than not a reaction, and can often exacerbate the very problem we're trying to resolve. So at the core of all this, the foundation is the being element, quality of the human being is something that can be recognized through practice and training. And mindfulness is the most accessible of those tools. I'm not the only tool, of course. It's more than a tool, but let's use that language. And so we can be, and then we can choose to act. We want to act more wisely. We want to speak more kindly. We want to be able to hold complexity in a different way. And make choices that are in everyone's best interest. We were talking before about, what's going on in the world. It's just like increasing greed and selfishness. Like small number of people want to take it all and get more and more power and control. That is a recipe for disaster. And it's very easy to look out and see disaster. It's everywhere. So we're needing to do it differently, and we can start with ourselves, as you say, touch our own wholeness, even for a moment, is a game changer.
Thank you. Just before ending this, and I know we could go for many hours on this conversation, but just before we talked about attachment trauma, and I really want to address that, because you were really saying that it's at the core of many other traumas, and attachment trauma can be different in an individual society or culture, more focused on individuals, but it also happens in community culture. Like African is more, in Africa, it's the community is very important, but people going more and more to cities and living more and more in cities are more individual. So how do you see this attachment, these attachment traumas, if I can say it in a pro form?
So what is, there's this saying, it takes a village to raise a child. So I think that it feels very African.
Yes.
When I say that, I get an image of Africa. But so it's like a cultural, it's not even understanding, it's embedded in the culture, certainly from my understanding of in Africa, all the various communities, because there are many different kinds of communities in Africa, it's a collectivist culture rather than individualist culture. And that is probably true in many Eastern cultures as well. The Western culture tends to be more individualistic. And it's not one is better than another, it's just having an awareness that they're different. So I mean, it's an interesting question. I don't have a fully formed answer or response to how that might show up, as how would the fracturing that's part of suffering and trauma show up in a collective mindset, collectivist culture. But I think that the obvious way that we can see is that the fragmentation of communities, and so the resource that communities can offer might be less available. We often, as you say, there's this migration to the urban areas in South Africa to try and get work, because poverty is so connected with lack of work opportunity and unemployment, which is off the charts in South Africa. So many people move away from their communities of origin. And I was speaking to a colleague of mine recently, who's a black-bodied man, and he spoke very powerfully about how going back to the rural areas where his family live, and the geography and the topography and the feel of it, and just being back in there, just it touched something in him that he doesn't get in this. And this is he's almost westernized, very psychologized and understands all these things, but there was something that is touched in that. So that got broken down dramatically during apartheid. You know, the forced labor, migrant labor, black-bodied men in particular being forced to go and work in the most awful conditions and in hostels. And so it's part of our inherited trauma, especially in those communities. So for me, the orientation is to recognize the healing in collectivism. You know, and that's true in the Buddha's teaching, Sangha. Sangha is community. We heal in community. And I think that's something that we can learn from the African and Eastern cultures. We can, of course, heal in one-on-one. I've just come off a retreat and this last few days, and just sitting in a community of 40 people dedicated to being awake and listening deeply and being compassionate, just that quality of being with other human beings in that way, irrespective of what else we might have learned or internalized or practiced or encountered, was in and of itself healing. So I think it's complex. But there's something that we really should not forget in the healing inflection that is constellated around being in community. And when you're in an intentional community, or then there's a community where the underlying qualities of honoring each other's humanness, that includes one's distress, pain, and suffering, from the ground of presence, of compassion, of a willingness to listen without reactivity, that's when you really see the flourishing and the value of community. And so we've got a lot to learn from Africa, actually, the ground here. And while we talk a lot about apartheid and the symptoms of suffering collectively and the distress and the pervasive awfulness of all these massive social issues that we face, if you walk around the streets of South Africa, on the whole, you'll engage with people with a tremendous level of warmth, yes, of realness, of down-to-earthness, of being seen. And you don't have to have a long conversation, it's just momentary. It's in the quality. So there's something that hasn't been lost. Yeah. It's somewhat forgotten or it's underplayed. But I think when people, especially when I know this, because people who come to visit South Africa, that every single person says the same thing. It's like, wow, people are so warm. So there is some healing that's happening, and there's a lot more that's needed, structurally, collectively, and individually. But we've also got some incredible embedded wisdom and compassion and built in already to the ground here on the African soil. Yeah. We would do
That's
well
the
to listen.
South African resilience.
Yeah, South African resilience.
Yes.
It's an extraordinary resilient country.
It is.
And if you think of what's going on in the world, it's characterized by increasing divisiveness, alienation, separation, polarization, wherever you look, except in South Africa, where, the ANC lost power for the first time last year in the national elections. And instead of getting reactive, they went into a government of national unity. Isn't that extraordinary?
That is.
And so we have the main opposition and the largest party, the ANC, and a number of smaller parties in a coalition. We've bucked the trend again. So our government of national unity is something that is an expression of a possibility that South Africa embodies. It's so interesting, just as a last funny thought, so GNU, Government of National Unity, a GNU is actually a wildebeest. It's a crazy looking animal, which if you go to the game park, you'll see a GNU or wildebeest, which is the weirdest looking creature in the African game parks, because it looks like it's 5 different animals stuck together as one animal. And it's the perfect representation. It's a little bit cumbersome, it's a little bit awkward, but it works. And so, yeah, there's there's something that's growing here that's possible. And I think that's really quite magnificent. Amidst all of the suffering, there's also this possibility and warmth and groundedness, down-to-earthness, which is unmistakable when you're here.
Well, I want to end on this hope that you're sharing with us. And thank you very, very much for this incredible conversation and for sharing a little bit of your wiseness and of what you've been learning. And I hope we'll have another opportunity to talk together and share everything with our audience and with people we are talking to. And thank you,
Thank
Simon.
you, Florence. I've really been very moving and
Thank you.
special and memorable. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing.
Likewise.
And it's really a treat and I don't know, there's something, your voice is going somewhere very, deep inside. And just for that, that's a gift for me. Thank you.
Thank you.